I've just got two more chunks, Chair, if you don't mind. Thank you. So moving now to the Reef plan. The Academy of Science was quite critical of the draft Reef plan when it was released on a number of fronts. Firstly, climate change. It says that it virtually ignores climate change. How do you respond to that?
Long-term sustainability plan, we have had a very strong input to it. There were parts of the Academy's submission that I agreed with, some of their priorities and risks. I think they were commenting on an exposure draft put out in, I believe, October. Is it October or November? Late last year. I know that the
draft plan, yep.
Yeah, the draft plan. Sorry. I know that the comments they made and many other people made have made a substantial input to the revisions of that draft.
Not in relation to climate change, though.
Well, it's up to when it's finally released. The climate change was featured strongly in their report. For me, the long-term plan is such a critical thing that because it actually is the first document after the strategic assessment that talks about solutions and long-term. So I remain very positive that I think it'd be very surprising if when the plan is released that it doesn't continue to evolve. And I base that on my 10 years of experience with the Reef Water Quality Protection Plan. When it was released, people thought it was an impossible task to halt and reverse the decline of water quality, and nothing happened for a few years. The targets were revised, and now 10 years later we're seeing positive signs. This is a more complex, ambitious thing to look at all sources of pressure. So I'm fully expecting the plan to evolve. There'll be future versions that will fill gaps as knowledge comes in and as monitoring information emerges. So I encourage the public and government to treat the long-term plan as a long-term project.
Just coming back to the Academy's criticism, they also talked about dredging and observed correctly that it didn't set any hard targets for cumulative impacts like dredging. And in fact, they say, quote, instead the draft 2050 plan will ensure growth in new impacts, such as more dredging, coastal development and fossil fuel expansion. Why isn't there a concrete proposal to put limits on dredging?
The Federal Minister has made a concrete policy direction.
Not to set a limit. My
to completely ban.
About the setting of a limit.
It's a pretty good limit.
It's a complex question if you're talking about the actual limits for all dredging, and we've covered those in the discussions with Queensland's pre-election commitments. We already have published a policy several years ago that talks about the setting of limits to dredging and managing the amounts downwards. But since we made that policy statement, quite a bit has changed in the policy space with the Minister's announcement, and likely will again, once the Queensland intentions become clear.
So I'm just a bit confused. The Minister's announcement was about dumping, not about dredging. So.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
I'm talking about limits on dredging.
Yeah.
And you're saying you published a paper a few years ago calling for those, but that's not in the draft Reef plan.
I talked about a cap on maintenance dredging, total maintenance dredging, some years ago. Yes, well, I think probably I should refer you to the later when the draft does emerge.
Is that something that you hope future versions might deal better with?
I think what will change in shipping and port development is, well, firstly, some of the things that I thought were probably, and I can't recall if the Academy or others have talked about the boundaries of ports and the fear of the port boundaries seem to be quite big. For me, the boundary of the port is the marine park. The lines that have been drawn by harbour masters to show their limit of their ship navigation interests and other things, to me, shouldn't be taken as outside things in the marine park that would be overridden by those port boundaries. The federal legislation would prevail over any state decision or state-owned port decision, and so to me, there already is a sharp limit on the spatial extent of the ports in the reef. I do expect them to evolve within those limits. I think that I noticed I mentioned the concept of a reef class vessel, limiting, essentially matching the scale of the ships operating in the Great Barrier Reef to the geography of the reef. It's done elsewhere. It's done in Port Hedland, Newcastle and ports internationally. I think we'll see a change in policies around shipping. Some of them take time. I mean, there was a policy on ballast water disposal 15 years ago, and they tend to be grandfathered through ship designs. But the trend that I can see in ports and shipping is a tightening, not a loosening, of the limits to environmental effects around ports. So that's a very broad statement.
It is indeed.
And I think dredging will be caught up in that.
Let's
dredging
hope so.
and disposal.
Let's hope so. Just coming to the water quality.
You indicated you had a couple more questions. This is the fourth question.
Sorry, I said a couple more aspects.
Okay, well, Senator Rice would actually like some questions too.
Could I have another, say, up to 5-2, another 7 minutes?
Well, you'll be taking it out of other things this afternoon that you won't get questions on, because we did agree to try and finish today.
Okay. No,
so
I think that's a good aspiration.
Okay.
This is probably my largest chunk for today, so I'll, if you don't
as long
mind,
as you realise we
continue
finished at 11 as we agreed to.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So just moving to the water quality targets, or rather the lack thereof in that draft reef plan, there's an overarching target, although you could hardly call it a target, of no detrimental impact. There's no figures attached to that. There's no time frame attached to that. How does that come close to UNESCO's request for a target-driven framework?
There are strong targets in water quality. I think some of the concepts about no detrimental harm are going to take quite a while to be specific. I think the science would not be there, for instance. If you notice in the Academy submission, there was quite a lot of detail around the risks and the shortfalls, but not a lot on the solutions. And I think I think that's because the science will take quite a while to complete, and as the Water Quality Protection Plan did. So I'm not worried by, in some areas, it being difficult to set targets. There are specific water quality targets, and we have specific water quality guidelines for what constitutes healthy water in the reef, and we've had those for 5 or 6 years now, and they'll be informing the evolution of the long-term plan, I'm sure.
So we had targets...
Senator, sorry, just to further clarify Dr Reichheld's answer, the language you used, I think, in the long-term sustainability plan, or the draft of it, is a reference to an outcome and an objective, not a target. And so there are specific targets related to
that fit underneath that,
reduction.
But you're not able to define what no detrimental impact is actually.
Well, I think Dr Reichheld's answer stands in that sense. As you would also be aware,
so it's a sort of motherhood aspiration as opposed to a target per se.
The Reef plan, which preceded the long-term sustainability plan, updated this as the science got better and evolved. Updated the management of the reef.
Okay, so the no detrimental impact isn't a target as such.
Within the hierarchy of the document, it's an outcome, an objective that's sort of being sought, and the targets inform and support that. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And just a few more on the reef plan. The Academy of Science also said that the reduction targets in the draft plan are likely to be swamped by increased sediment, nutrient and pesticide loads from dredging and new agricultural expansion in the reef catchment. Have those extra impacts been accounted for in the plan?
I didn't fully follow the Academy's comment there, and I don't particularly agree with... it depends on how it's interpreted. The dredging does remobilise nutrients and sediment. It's a locally significant and about to get more local with the Minister's announcements. Ports are highly constrained. There doesn't appear to be avenues for new ports now under any government's intentions. So I think the implication that there's a wave about to break of expansions of ports, I disagree with. I'm
sorry, you disagree that there's port expansions planned?
There's about to be a wave of...
Or that there's new ports planned. They're obviously a big difference there.
Multiplication of ports is what I was talking about.
Right.
As there was 5 years ago. You know, the 12-mile channel through Repulse Bay, for instance, for the shale. I think I'm being diverted off the question here. I disagreed with the implication of the generic comment about swamped and pesticides and so on. I think there's too many things being mixed up in there to give a... It's a general statement.
All right, noted. Can I just finally go to the noise issue? The Strat assessment talked about how underwater noise pollution is obviously a growing problem and a risk to the reef, and the 2050 plan includes an action to develop a guideline on assessing and managing underwater noise. How many staff have been assigned to prepare that guideline?
I'd have to talk with my colleagues at Maritime Safety Authority about how to deliver that. It's part of the North East Australia Shipping Plan. I was very pleased that colleagues in AMSA included that as a goal, because I think it is a potential impact amongst many other effects of shipping. So I can't answer your question on numbers of people because
you don't have any in the authority working on that?
Pardon?
Are there no, pardon me, are there no staff within Gabrumpa working on that? Are they working under the auspices of AMSA?
That it would most likely be done through the linkages with AMSA at the authority at the moment, where it was one of 18 initiatives that we asked to be put in into the plan. I think it was 18, a figure like that. So we're giving priority right at the moment to the cumulative impact study, the settings of standards and guidelines for the biodiversity targets in the long-term plan. The noise, the problem of noise at the moment is not the highest of our priorities, but I would like it to stay in there as something that needs to be solved.
Sure, but will your staff be the ones that develop that guideline, or is that going to be somebody else's responsibility?
It's more likely to become a partnership with AMSA, ourselves, but
okay,
it's
so
hypothetical because
yet?
we haven't done the decision-making around it yet.
Okay, so that process hasn't even begun?
No.
The guidelines haven't started to be prepared yet?
That's correct.
Okay. And is there a timeframe on when they will be prepared?
Not at this stage.
Okay.
The North East Shipping Plan is explicitly mentioned in the long-term plan, and I'm sure actions under there will be prioritised along with all the other ones.
And just one final question. Given that the World Heritage Committee had asked Australia to develop, amongst other things, quote, a shipping policy which will ensure that ports and shipping activities do not negatively impact the overall universal value of the reef, do you think the absence of the development of the noise guideline and the lack of time frame is going to satisfy them in relation to that small aspect?
I can't speak for the committee. What I can say is that there's quite a few issues there that are seen as important, but the bigger issues for ports and shipping would be around the port development, and that's being very strongly addressed, as we've talked about. I think with shipping, Australia, the Barrier Reef is the most highly protected shipping waterway on the planet, and it's one of the more lightly used ones. So there's quite a lot of actions taken under the particularly sensitive sea area designation for the reef.
I think my colleague has questions about marine piloting, which are certainly
my point is that it's not as though nothing's happening. There is huge effort. 40% of Australia's navigational aids in its entire marine territories are in the Barrier Reef. So it's a highly managed area. Okay. But that doesn't mean that where we identify a risk, we'll keep putting it on the list of things and keep prioritising them.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Reichelt. Thank you,
Senator Rice.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. Reichelt. Yes, I want to continue on some questions about issues of shipping, and in particular about mandatory pilotage through areas of the Great Barrier Reef. I mean, last week we had the Chinese ship captain being charged for sailing through part of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park without a pilot, and I want to return to that issue in a minute. But in particular, I want to talk about the areas that currently aren't protected under compulsory pilotage areas, where there have been significant numbers of groundings of ships outside that areas. So I was wanting to know whether you've done any work on whether the areas covered by mandatory pilotage should be expanded.
We've relied on the Det Norske Veritas review that was done for the North East Shipping Plan. Where there have been groundings in the past, there are now pilotage, with one exception, the Shandong coal carrier. In that case, the accident was caused by crew. I think the pilot would have left the ship by that stage. I think the issue of pilotage will continue to be important. Some of the groundings that have occurred with pilots on board, so it's not the only issue that we need to look at. I was pleased that the compliance for the incident last week was pursued hard. The ship didn't actually enter the hydrographer's passage without a pilot. It was detected having that intention and stopped. They put a pilot on, it navigated safely, it went to China, it left its coal in China, and then when that master came back to Newcastle, he was charged with the intention to leave through the channel, and that's what he was charged and convicted for. The vessel traffic service tracks 40 or 50 vessels that go through every day. The pilotage areas could well come under review if the risks change. The high risk area for the reef is ships leaving through the matrix of the reef, through the hydrographer's passage and the northern route.
So,
yeah, and they are protected.
So
by
you're not
pilotage.
currently doing any work as to whether the area should be expanded, though. I mean, looking at the statistics, there seem to be two areas where significant groundings have occurred over the last 15 years, both outside the mandatory pilotage areas, Gladstone and Muralien. So I'm just interested, what work you've currently got on, whether you are currently doing work on looking at those areas outside the current mandatory pilotage areas.
I'm not aware of anything right at the minute. As I say, I understood it was fully reviewed about 12 months ago, but I should check that I'm correct in that, I think, Senator.
Okay, well, if you could get back to us as to whether you're doing any work as to looking at the necessity to expand the areas.
Or what other parts of government are doing that. The pilotage is policed under the Marine Park Act, but it's legislated under the Marine Park Act, but policed principally by AMSA and the Vessel Traffic Service.
Yep.
So it's a joint arrangement.
Okay. Now, going back to the issue of the Chinese ship as an example of breaching of the standards, in recent years, major shipping accidents in Australia that have posed a threat to the environment have all involved foreign flag vessels. For example, in September last year alone, AMSA inspected 351 foreign ships and found 1,030 deficiencies. 31 ships were detained because the deficiency was so bad. In comparison, there were 0 Australian ships which had been detained. So I'm interested as to whether the authority has any reflections or responses to the increasing issue of managing international ships to Australian standards.
We don't have the... we take a very strong interest in it and participate with Queensland Maritime Safety Queensland and the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, and as a group we're actively reviewing risks and incidents around the barrier reef. You were speaking more nationally as well, but its intensive focus is in the barrier reef. We will explore and argue for and pursue any what do they call it, a term under the convention, any action that Australia can take to improve the safety of shipping in the reef, we will pursue. And I will follow up on the question you raised about extent of pilotage. In terms of, I do know that Maritime Safety used its global network and International Maritime Organisation links to raise the Watchkeepers Convention for ship crew quality and tiredness, and that resonated around the shipping world. So Australia, as arms of Australian government, are very active in where they can use influence to improve shipping safety. I know AMSA does have takes a strong line, and it's considered globally to be the strongest in terms of detention and port state control. I know there's been ships banned recently because they've had 3 strikes of too many faults with their equipment on the boats. So
we have got very high standards, and so and the issue is you've got a lot of these ships which are irregular or infrequent visitors, and they know that they might get pinged once and they don't think they're going to be back here for a while, and that's obviously going to be an increasing concern with the increasing shipping traffic through the Great Barrier Reef. So wondering whether you've Is that an issue of concern to you, given the increasing amount of our shipping being foreign-owned ships? And in particular, we've got the proposed deregulation of coastal shipping, which is likely to increase that further still, and wondering whether you have considered that or in terms of the implications for protecting the reef, because one accident, only one small accident from an irregular visitor, and massive damage can be done.
If I just comment, the way I think of shipping safety is more is always needed. There's no such thing as being complacent about it for the reason you just gave about one accident or one lapse from a crew or a pilot. So I want to put that on the record. Anytime some avenue to pursue heightened protection comes up, we pursue it to the best of our ability.
So will you be making representations to the government or to the minister, say, about the proposed deregulation of coastal shipping?
I haven't been, I'm not aware of any of our team looking at that aspect of the governance of shipping. I would look to, and I will approach the AMSA management for their analysis of the impact on shipping safety generally, especially in the barrier reef. So it's out of my expertise and frankly my authorities probably, but it's one of intense interest if there's a new risk that we...
Do you have any data on what percentage of shipping through the Great Barrier Reef is Australian flagged?
It would be available, I don't have it.
But you don't have that, that'd be AMSA, I suppose.
Yeah, most of the questions you've asked are under the direct control of...
I mean, it'd be mostly foreign,
safety.
wouldn't it? We're lucky to have, I think, 12 ships out there at the moment.
If we could put that on notice, I might ask the same question of AMSA.
I think that they would be better placed to brief you on it.
But given the increased risk of accidents from foreign-owned ships, it sounds like it would be something that would be useful for the authority to know as well.
It would be. In terms of shipping, I mean, the risks of movement of exotic organisms, the rise in free on board versus cost insurance freight loading, which means ships park for a long time. We do work closely with the maritime people enough to assess what are the directions the shipping industry and the resource industries might take to lower the risks to the reef. And we're in constant, that's a constant topic of discussion. The one you've raised I'm not familiar with.
Okay, thank you.